The signal came without warning. No build up, no diplomatic message sent. Weeks ahead, no quiet whisper through back channels. One moment the space around Earth was empty, the next 4,000 ships hung in the dark like a wall of iron and fire stretching from horizon to horizon. Every telescope on Earth, every satellite, every deep space relay station swung toward the same coordinates and sent back the same image. 4,000 ships waiting. The Galactic Dominion had arrived. Fleet Commander Drog stood at the center of his command deck and looked at the small blue planet below him. He had done this 17 times. 17 civilizations had looked up at his fleet and gone quiet with fear. Some had cried, some had immediately opened surrender channels. One species had destroyed their own cities before he could even speak, so desperate were they to show submission. Drag had come to find the whole process predictable. Arrive, display force, receive, surrender, move on. He opened the broadcast channel. It went out across every frequency, every communication band, every receiver within a 100 light years. The galaxy was watching. They always watched when Drog came somewhere new. He spoke slowly and clearly in the Dominion tongue, which his translators pushed out simultaneously in every recorded language of the human species. He told them their fleet was outgunned. He told them their population was outmatched. He told them the Galactic Dominion had consumed civilizations far older and far more powerful than theirs, and those civilizations no longer existed. He told them they had 72 hours to transmit a formal surrender, at which point human leaders would be brought aboard the flagship to sign documentation of absorption into the Dominion. Resistance, he said, was not a choice they were permitted to make. He closed the broadcast and waited. 3 minutes passed. Then the communications officer, a young Velari named PRN, turned slowly from his console. His face carried the particular expression of someone trying very hard to understand what he was looking at. Commander Prince said carefully, "We are receiving responses already." Drog straightened. Surrender offers sometimes came fast from the cowardly ones. Put them through. What came through was not a surrender offer. It was laughter, not one voice, not a small group. It was coming in from hundreds of different channels simultaneously. A deep space mining station near the fourth planet, research outpost on the far side of their moon, civilian communication bands across the surface of Earth itself. Somewhere in the middle of it all, a man could be heard struggling to catch his breath between laughs, saying something to someone beside him that the translator rendered as, "Did he just did he actually just say that, like in a movie?" More laughter followed from whoever was beside him. Drog stared at the audio display. PRN pulled up visual feeds from several human broadcast networks. Across them, people were sitting in front of cameras, not military officials, not government leaders, just ordinary humans reacting to his message. Some were covering their mouths, some had tears on their faces from laughing. One older woman was shaking her head slowly with a wide grin, saying something the translator processed as, "Oh, they have no idea." Human, who appeared to be some kind of public commentator, was already speaking to a large audience with the energy of someone describing a very entertaining sporting event. He kept replaying a clip of Drog's ultimatum and pausing it at specific lines, then looking into the camera with raised eyebrows as the crowd behind him lost composure repeatedly. Drog turned to his strategy advisor, Bora named Sesic, who had been with him through all 17 campaigns. Sesic, Drog said in a very low voice, explain this. Sesic watched the feeds for a long moment. They may be experiencing psychological collapse. An unusual form he offered, though his tone made clear he did not believe that. They are not collapsing. No, Sesk agreed, they do not appear to. Beyond the feeds, a human government building could be seen in the background of one broadcast, and officials were walking in and out of it rapidly, so there was some response happening at the administrative level, but the camera kept cutting back to crowds outside the building, and the crowds were not rioting, not running, not weeping in the streets. They were talking loudly to each other, gesturing at the sky, some of them holding handmade signs that had writing on them. The translator was still processing. PRN read the translations aloud as they came in. One sign said, "Welcome to Earth, hope you brought Sna CKS." Another said, "We have been through worse." A third, held by a small child, said something that translated roughly to, "And why Dad says you picked the wrong planet." Drog looked at that last one for a long time. He had arrived at 17 civilizations. He had seen fear, he had seen despair, he had seen species crumble at the sight of his fleet before a single weapon was fired. He had never seen signs. He had never seen a child holding a sign. He turned away from the screen and clasped his hands behind his back and looked out the forward viewport at the small blue planet. It sat there beneath him, cloud-covered and unhurried, turning slowly on its axis as it always had. The oceans caught the light of their sun and gleamed. Drog spoke quietly, "Get me more data on the species." Sesic was already working, but even as he pulled files, he kept glancing back at the feeds, where the laughter was still coming, steady and unbroken, like it had no intention of stopping. Subcommander Pratt had overseen 14 planetary surrender ceremonies. He knew exactly how they were supposed to go. The delegation would land. Local leaders would be waiting, pale and rigid, trying to hold themselves together. There would be silence in the streets. There would be the specific stillness of a species that understood it had lost. Pratt would set the documentation on the table. The leaders would sign, and that would be the end of it. Clean, predictable. He was not prepared for Rail. The human was already standing outside the landing zone when the shuttle touched down, hands in his pockets, watching the craft settle onto the ground with the casual interest of someone observing a delivery vehicle. He was not tall by human standards, not visibly armed, not accompanied by a military escort. He had 2 aides behind him who were quietly talking to each other about something entirely unrelated to the delegation that had just arrived from a 4,000 ship fleet overhead. Pratt descended the ramp in full ceremonial armor, flanked by 6 officers. He stopped at the base and looked at the human. Rail smiled and said, "Long trip, come inside. I had food prepared." Pratt had not expected food. The room they were led into was simple, a long table, chairs sized approximately for the Velari frame, a window overlooking a courtyard where a fountain moved quietly. On the table were several dishes covered with lids and 2 large containers of liquid. Rail sat down on his side, poured something from one container into a cup for himself and gestured for PR and his officers to take their seats. Prasad, his officers, remained standing behind him, which was protocol. Rail looked at the standing officers and said, "They can sit too, we have enough chairs." "They are on duty," PR said. Rail shrugged. "Offer stands." He lifted one of the dish covers and slid it toward PR's side of the table. "This one should be fine for your biology." We checked. Looked down at the dish. He did not eat it, but he noted that someone had in fact checked. "We are here to discuss the terms of air," said. "Already eating. We can get to that. I wanted to ask you something first, if that's all right." Pra blinked. In 14 ceremonies, no planetary representative had ever wanted to ask him something first. "Ask," Pra said, mostly because he could not think of a reason to refuse. Rail looked genuinely curious. "Velari, you have a mourning tradition?" "Yes, where you carve the names of lost soldiers into something permanent before a campaign, not after." Pratt went still. "How do you know that?" "We have been studying your culture since you appeared in our orbit." Rail said it simply, without apology. "It's interesting. Most cultures memorialize after you memorialize before. What does that mean to your people?" Pra stared at him. He was aware that his officers behind him had shifted slightly. It was not a comfortable shift. "It means," Prath said slowly, "that we acknowledge loss before it occurs so that no death is forgotten in the chaos of war." Rail nodded. He looked like he was genuinely thinking about that. "That's a heavy thing to carry into every fight." "It is meant to be." Rail nodded again and picked up his cup. For a moment the room was simply quiet. Pratt placed the surrender documentation on the table. "I am required to present these. Your leadership signs. Transfer of authority begins within 30 days. Your governmental structures are largely preserved under Dominion oversight." Rail looked at the documents. He did not reach for them. He looked at them the way a person might look at a menu in a restaurant they had no intention of ordering from. "We're not going to sign those," he said. Pra said carefully, "You understand the fleet above your planet?" "Yes." "You understand what that fleet is capable of?" "We have been doing a lot of research on that, actually." Rail refilled his cup. "Your energy weapons are very impressive. The targeting array on the command ship is unlike anything we have built. We have people very excited about the propulsion systems. One of our engineers sent me a message this morning that was mostly just the word beautiful, repeated several times." Pratt looked at him. Rail met his gaze. The human's expression was not defiant. It was not performing bravery. He was simply a man sitting at a table, comfortable in his own chair, having a conversation. That was what unsettled PRTH most. He had seen defiance. Defiance was easy to read. It was fear wearing a different costume. This was not that. Pratt leaned forward slightly. "Are you afraid?" Representative Rail thought about it, genuinely appeared to think about it the way someone considers a question they find interesting. "I think," he said, "that we are a species that has had to make peace with fear a long time ago. We don't really have the option of letting it run the meeting." He paused. "No offense." Pra sat back. He gathered his documents and stood. His officers snapped to attention. Pra looked at the human one more time, trying to find the thing underneath the calm. He could not Find it outside walking back to the shuttle. He opened his private communicator and sent a single message. To Commander Drog, it said, "They are not pretending. I do not know what to tell you. They are not pretending." He boarded the shuttle. Behind him, through the window, he could see Rail, still at the table, pouring himself another cup, apparently content to sit there a while longer. Drog decided the problem was that humans had not truly seen what the fleet could do. They had seen the ships. They had counted them, studied them, sent their engineers enthusiastic messages about propulsion systems, but they had not seen the weapons fire. They had not watched something large and solid cease to exist. In a single second, Drog had learned in his 17 campaigns that there was a specific moment when a species stopped calculating and started feeling. That moment usually came the first time they watched his fleet perform a targeted strike. He selected 3 uninhabited moons in the outer system, rocky, airless, geologically dead. Nothing lived on them. Nothing would be harmed. The point was not destruction for its own sake. The point was demonstration. He gave the order. All 3 moons ceased to exist within 11 seconds of each other. The light from the strikes traveled inward through the solar system and reached human sensors in sequence. Every telescope, satellite dish, and deep space relay recorded it. Every human broadcast network cut immediately to live coverage. Drog watched the human feeds as they showed the expanding debris clouds where 3 moons had been, their presenters going quiet for a moment before the commentary began. He opened the broadcast channel again and let the silence do the work. Let them sit with what they had just seen. Let the reality settle in. He waited. Response came in 40 seconds. A human voice, female, speaking quickly, with the excitement of someone who had just witnessed something they needed to repeat immediately to everyone they knew. His translator processed her words in real time. "Okay, so okay, are you watching this? That was 3 moons, 3 in 11 seconds. Hold on, I need to calculate the yield on that." A pause, rapid typing sounds. "Becca, pull the spectral data from the outer relay." "Yes, all 3. I need to know if the energy signature is consistent across strikes or if they adjusted for the different mass profiles." Someone named Becca said something in the background. "Because it matters. If they adjusted, that means the targeting system is adaptive, not preset. That is a completely different." "Yes, I know there is a fleet above our heads. I am aware." "Give me the data." Drog stared at his communications console. He opened a wider scan of human broadcast channels across dozens of frequencies. He found variations of the same scene. Humans talking rapidly, pulling up data, drawing things on screens, interrupting each other with new calculations. Group of what appeared to be students had pushed several tables together and were covering them in handwritten notes. 2 older men were arguing passionately about something, both pointing at the same image of the debris cloud, neither of them showing any indication of fear whatsoever. On one channel, a presenter was speaking to a panel of what the translator identified as scientific experts. She asked them what the destruction of 3 moons meant strategically. One of the experts leaned forward and said, "Honestly, it tells us more about their weapons than their intentions. The question isn't whether they can hit something big. The question is whether They can hit something small and moving. He turned to his colleague. What do you think the tracking delay is at that range? His colleague began doing math on a piece of paper. Sesage appeared at Drog's shoulder. They are analyzing us. Sesage said, I can see that within the first hour of the demonstration, they have posted 47 separate written analyses on their public information network. Several of them are, Sesage paused, accurate. Drog looked at him sharply. How accurate? One of them correctly estimated the effective range of the long strike cannons within a 4% margin. Sesage's voice was very careful. It was written by someone who, according to his profile, teaches physics to young students. Drog looked back at the feeds. A new element had appeared that he had not anticipated. Human creative individuals had begun making things. One person had painted a rapid image of the three debris clouds in bright colors and posted it publicly, titled something the translator rendered as they said. Surrender, we said. Interesting. It had been shared by thousands of other humans. Within minutes, someone had written a song. It was fast and loud and apparently celebratory in tone. The translator struggled with the lyrics but captured something about fire in the outer dark and hearts that don't know how to break. And then PRN still at the communications console said in a very strange voice, Commander, they are selling things. What? PRN turned his screen. A human commerce site showed a small image of the debris cloud printed on a ceramic cup. Below it, the price. Below the price, a note that said, limited edition, 3 moons in 11 seconds. Historic. There were already over 900 orders. Drog sat down slowly in his command chair. This was not something he had a protocol for. He had protocols for surrender. He had protocols for resistance. He had a protocol for the one species that had tried to negotiate a trade agreement in the middle of a surrender ceremony. He did not have a protocol for a species that watched 3 moons get destroyed and immediately made commemorative merchandise. He thought about the message PR had sent. From the surface, they are not pretending. He looked at the ceramic cup on PRN's screen for a long moment. Get me, Sesage, he said finally, and pull everything we have on human history, all of it. I want to understand what we are actually dealing with outside the viewport. The planet turned beneath him, unhurried and blue, and somewhere down there, 900 humans were waiting for their cups to arrive. The historian's name was Voss, and he was the only person in the fleet briefing room who had not slept in 2 days. He was Sorrenti, a neutral observer species the Dominion kept on retainer for exactly this kind of situation, when a new civilization required assessment before absorption. Voss came along, reviewed the cultural record, and delivered a report. It had always been a formality. The report would note interesting customs, flag any biological hazards, and recommend a governing structure. That was it. Voss had written versions of the same report 11 times. He had not slept in 2 days because this time the cultural record kept producing things he did not know how to file. Drog sat at the head of the table. His senior officers were ranged along both sides. The lights had been dimmed for the presentation. Voss stood at the front and looked out at all of them and took a slow breath. I will begin with the numbers, he said, because numbers were solid and he needed solid ground. Before he got to the rest, he put up a Timeline of human history on the display. Behind him, in the last 10,000 years, humans have experienced 4 events that reduced their total population by more than 20%. 2 of those events were natural planetary scale disruptions in climate and disease. 2 of them were caused by humans themselves fighting other humans. He paused to let that settle. In each case, the surviving population rebuilt. The average recovery time from near civilizational collapse across all 4 events was between 3 and 5 generations. During those recovery periods, they did not abandon technological development. They did not reduce cultural output. They continued producing art, literature, scientific work, and notably humor. One of the admirals, a broad-shouldered Velari named Sin, said they laughed during collapses. They did. Voss pulled up documentation. One of their most significant literary traditions involves taking their worst historical periods and writing about them with dark comedy. There is an entire genre. It is very popular. The more catastrophic the period, the more material they apparently find in it. He moved to the next display. They have a word for this. It roughly translates as gallows humor. The concept is that when circumstances are at their most terrible, humor becomes a method of psychological survival, a way of looking at something unbearable and refusing to be destroyed by it. The room was quiet. Voss continued, I want to be precise about what this means for our situation. This is not a species that does not understand fear. Their biology produces the standard stress responses, elevated heart rate, cortisol production, threat response activation. They feel fear. He looked at directly. They have simply developed over thousands of years of repeated catastrophe, a cultural immune system against letting it make decisions for them. He pulled up a new set of images, old photographs, paintings, fragile and faded, people in ruins, burned cities, flooded land, and in the middle of some of those images, smiling faces, groups of people sitting in the wreckage of their world and smiling after their second large self-inflicted conflict, which killed approximately 70 million of them within 6 years. They held public dances in the streets the day it ended. They called it celebrating. Within 20 years they had produced a generation of scientists, artists, and engineers who built the foundation of their current civilization. The individuals who lived through the worst of it went on to raise children who thought the future was exciting. Voss paused. Commander D. Our fleet destroyed 3 moons this morning. Within 40 minutes, a human was selling cups with the image on it. That is not a coping mechanism. That is a reflex. It is as automatic to them as breathing. Admiral Sen leaned forward. Then how do you defeat something with no fear response? I have been asking myself that question. Voss said, I do not have an answer. What I can tell you is what our weapons are designed for. They are designed to accelerate the natural fear response in a population until surrender seems like the only relief available. We overwhelm. We demonstrate. We give them something so large and so inescapable that the mind simply produces surrender as the only exit. He looked at his notes. That mechanism does not appear to be available to us here. Their history has already run that process on them repeatedly at a scale we would struggle to match, and each time they came out the other side making art about it. He closed his display. when Subcommander Pra sat across from their representative. Rael, he reported that the human seemed genuinely comfortable. I believe him. I believe the human was comfortable because a 4,000 ship fleet to a species that has watched its own cities burn and rebuilt them by hand reads as a problem to be solved rather than an ending to be feared. He sat down. The room was silent. For a long time, Drog had not moved. Through the entire presentation, he sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the last image still on the display, a photograph of humans standing in a devastated city, several of them laughing at something out of frame, the rubble rising behind them in every direction. Finally, one of the younger officers said in a small voice, "Are they even going to surrender?" Voss looked at him. In 11,000 years of recorded history, Voss said quietly, "I found no instance of humans using that word in reference to themselves, not once, not to each other, not to anything." He folded his hands on the table. "I found the concept of surrender in their records primarily as something that happened to other people. Nobody said anything after that. It started in the lower decks the way most things did. A Velari maintenance crew working the overnight cycle on Deck 14 had found a human broadcast signal bleeding through on an unmonitored frequency. They had not been looking for it. One of them, a young soldier named Fair, had simply been trying to clear the channel interference and landed on it by accident. What came through was a recorded program, humans sitting around a table talking rapidly and interrupting each other and apparently finding everything the other person said hilarious. Fair had intended to clear the channel. Instead, he had sat down on a supply crate and watched for 40 minutes. By the time his shift supervisor found him, Fair had been joined by 3 other crew members, all of them crowded around the small receiver screen watching. The supervisor opened his mouth to say something, then he watched about 90 seconds of the program, then he pulled up a second crate and sat down. By the 3rd day of the fleet's orbit, human media had spread through the lower and middle decks like a slow leak, not through any organized effort, just through the natural movement of bored soldiers who found something interesting and shared it. Old human films passed through 11 different ship networks on copied drives. A 3-hour documentary about human deep-sea exploration traveled from the maintenance crews to the science division, where it caused a heated argument about pressure adaptation biology that went on for most of an afternoon. The comedy material traveled fastest. Something about it was difficult to explain. The humor did not always translate well. A lot of it depended on cultural references that required footnotes to understand, but underneath the references, something came through. Anyway, the structure of it, the way humans built tension in a story and then released it sideways, the specific timing of a pause before a line that was clearly designed to be unexpected. Several soldiers who watched enough of it found themselves anticipating the rhythm and laughing slightly before the translation even finished, not because they understood the joke, but because they recognized the shape of it. A Borthy gunner named Sepp, who had been with the fleet for 9 years and considered himself professionally unshockable, watched a 40-minute recorded performance by a single human standing alone on a stage talking about his species. The human described in graphic and loving detail how completely chaotic Daily human life was, how many things? Regularly went wrong, how many systems? Failed, how many plans collapsed and had to be remade from scratch, he described. It all with enormous affection, as though the chaos was the part he liked best. Sepp watched it twice, then he sat very still for a while, then he went and found Fair and said, "How long have they been like this?" Fair looked up the history files Voss had compiled, which had been circulating the ship in summary form since the briefing. Sepp read them in silence. When he finished, he put the reader down and stared at the wall. "They rebuilt everything," Sepp said. Every time, Fair confirmed." C was quiet for a moment. "We came here to conquer them." "Yes, they watched 3 moons disappear." And then C stopped. "They made cups. 900 orders by last count. It's higher." Now C sat back. He did not say anything more for a while. This was the pattern across the fleet: soldiers consuming human material and then going quiet, not frightened, something more unsettling than that, thoughtful. Soldiers who had boarded this mission with the clean certainty of overwhelming force, finding that certainty replaced gradually with a question they had not arrived with. The question was, what exactly are we doing here? Admiral Sen noticed it first at the command level, because she made it her habit to walk the ship and listen rather than call things up on a screen. She heard the question in the pauses in conversation. She saw it in the way crew members looked out at the planet in longer and longer stretches during their watch rotations. She saw it in Fair watching his human program with a strain expression of someone encountering a thing they want very much to understand. She went to Drag. She found him in his private observation room, which looked directly down at Earth. He was standing with his hands behind his back in his usual posture. He had been spending a lot of time in this room. The crew was asking questions. She said, "I know not about tactics, about purpose." He didn't respond to that. She stood beside him and looked down at the planet. From here, it was mostly blue with thin white cloud systems moving slowly across its surface. It looked very peaceful from this distance. Most planets did. "We have been in orbit for 6 days," she said. "We have fired no weapons at the planet. We have received no surrender. We have had one meeting with their representative that produced nothing." She paused. "Crew is beginning to wonder if we are going to leave without having done anything." "Is that what they are wondering?" "Some of them are hopping for it." Drog turned to look at her. She met his gaze and didn't look away. They watched the moon strike footage again. "Last night," Sen said, "the human footage. Their analysis version. Several of our weapons officers watched it and then came to me separately to say the humans had identified a targeting limitation in our long strike system that our own technical team had not formally documented." She paused. "Our weapons officers were impressed. They didn't want to be. They were anyway." Drog turned back to the window. "Get me a shuttle," he said. Sen waited. "I am going to go meet their representative," Drog said properly in person. Sen looked at him for a moment, then she nodded once and left. Drog stayed at the window a while longer, looking down at the blue world. Somewhere down there the cups had probably arrived by now. Rail had been given 20 minutes notice. Not that he particularly needed it. He arrived at the flagship landing bay in the same unhurried way he arrived everywhere. Jacket straight, nothing in his hands. when Drog descended from the interior of the ship to meet him in person for the first time. Rael looked up at him. Drog stood nearly a full head taller, armored, carrying 40 years of campaigns in his posture, and said simply, "Thank you for the invitation." Drog had been expecting many things. That was not among them. He had arranged a proper meeting room this time, not the Grand Command Hall, not a space designed to emphasize the scale of his fleet. Just a room, a table, 2 seats facing each other. He had made this decision deliberately, and he was not entirely sure why. Rael sat down across from him and placed something on the table between them. It was one of the ceramic cups, the limited edition 1/3 Moon's Debris Cloud. 11 seconds. Drog stared at it. "I ordered one," Rael said. "Thought it was appropriate to bring." He left it sitting there between them. "You wanted to meet. I have questions," Drog said. "Go ahead." Drog had prepared the questions carefully. He had spent 2 days on them, but sitting here across from this man who had placed a souvenir of his fleet's demonstration on the table between them like a neutral object, he found the ordered list rearranging itself. He said, "Why did you laugh?" Rael looked at him. Question had clearly landed differently than tactical questions would have. More personal. "When you broadcast the ultimatum," Drog continued, "the first response from your people was laughter. I have done this 17 times. No one has ever laughed." Rael was quiet for a moment. He looked at the cup on the table and then back at Drog. "Honestly," he said, "yes, because it was the most dramatic thing anyone had ever said to us." Rael said, 4,000 ships, a full surrender ultimatum, 72 hours. It sounded like something from one of our old stories, the kind where the hero is supposed to be frightened. He paused, and I think the reaction when something enormous and frightening arrives in the first feeling that comes isn't fear, but something like recognition, is laughter. Because you've heard this story before. You've lived through versions of it before, and you know how it goes. Drog said, "How does it go?" Rael looked at him steadily. "The same way it always has. We're still here." The room was quiet. Somewhere in the ship, systems hummed at a low frequency, constant and mechanical, the kind of sound that was always there and never noticed. "Your historian," Rael said. "Vass, he compiled a very thorough record of our history. Our people pulled it when it circulated through your ship's network." Drog did not ask how they had known. He was past being surprised by that kind of thing. "Then you know," Drog said, "what we know." "We've always known," Rael said. "We know what we are: messy, loud, extremely hard to kill, bad at giving up." He said it without pride, just description, the way someone might describe the geography of a place they lived. "We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are almost certainly not the smartest. We probably make more mistakes per decade than most civilizations make in a century." He picked up the ceramic cup, turned it in his hands once, set it back down. "But we don't stop. We never really have, and I think you've worked that out by now." Drog sat with that. "If I give the order to withdraw," he said slowly, as if testing the words, "the Dominion will require an explanation. What will you tell them?" Drog considered that this world is strategically unsuitable for absorption at this time. Rael nodded. "That sounds reasonable. They will not understand what that means." "Probably not. They may send someone else." Rael looked at him without blinking. "We'll be here." The certainty in those 3 words was not aggressive. It was not a threat. It was simply the tone of someone describing a condition of the universe, the way one describes gravity or the direction water runs. Drog stood. He was a large being in a small room, and the standing made that more apparent, but Rail did not shift in his chair. He just tilted his head slightly upward and waited. Keep the cup, Rail said. Drog looked down at the ceramic thing on the table, the three debris clouds, the date, the note that said historic. He picked it up. He wasn't sure why. He carried it with him out of the room. 6 hours later, the Galactic Dominion fleet began to move. 4,000 ships, the largest war force assembled in that region of the galaxy in 200 years, turned together and oriented toward the outer edge of the solar system. No announcement was made. No broadcast was sent. Drog did not open a channel. He simply gave the order and the fleet moved. The galaxy was still watching. They had been watching since the beginning. On Earth, someone noticed the ships moving first on a private telescope feed and posted about it, and within 10 minutes the news had spread. Everywhere people came outside. They stood in streets and fields and on rooftops and watched the distant lights of the fleet pulling away from their sky. And then somebody started laughing. Not because it was funny, or maybe because it was in the particular way that humans had always found their own survival funny, absurd, and improbable, and worth celebrating loudly. The laughter spread the way it had on the first day, moving across channels and crowds and communities, picking up as it went.